Hello and welcome to GuyLogicGaming. My name is Temko and this is Tannenberg, developed and published by Black Mill Games as well as M2H Games. These two companies have worked together on this title and are publishing it together as well in early access. Now, Tannenberg might sound very familiar if you know the game to a previous title by the same two developers by the name of Verdun, and in fact it is in essence a direct sequel to that game in basically every regard. But it's polished up, it has a couple of new interesting mechanics and changes, and it does things slightly different. That said, where Verdun was on the western front of World War I, Tannenberg takes place on the eastern front of World War I, more to the Russian and Prussian and what is now German and Polish areas. The game still mostly takes on the same approach as well, which is authentic World War I combat, authentic sounds, authentic uniforms, authentic squads, authentic locations even, modeled after the locations that were fought in World War I for various battles. So overall, this is a game that tries to make a authentic World War I FPS experience. And the question is, does it succeed in that regard, as well as it did with Verdun here in Tannenberg? Well, before we dive into everything about the game, we're first going to take a look at the options, setting, and talk about PC performance, because there are a couple of things here to make a note of. Most importantly to make a note of is, well, the visuals. Now, visual options are actually pretty comprehensive, with everything from graphics quality overall, texture quality, shadow quality, water and mud quality, even the ability to turn on or off gore, post-processing effects from anti-aliasing and ambient occlusion, the ability to change motion blur, even field of view from the default 65, which is really low, all the way up to 90, which is acceptable for a first-person shooter. I would strongly suggest raising this as lower, well, isn't as nice to enjoy. And then there is a ton of settings here that you can change as well. Controls-wise, the game offers quite a nice set of controls, fully rebindable of course, with mouse as well as aiming sensitivity for aiming down sights. Manual bolting is also available if that is your sort of thing. The game does do a lot of details and nuance to create a good World War I experience, and the controls also reflect that. Audio-wise, you have master, music, sound effects, voice, and voice chat volume. My suggestion is to lower voice volume extremely low because, well, the screaming, yelping, crying, and agony for their mamas, as you will notice when we go into gameplay, gets old really fast. Now, for the less impressive part is that this game doesn't look that amazing visually for the performance it gets. Now, I'll go into everything about the way the visuals are really just the same from those from Verdun in many regards in terms of visual fidelity, and they really haven't improved that much in my opinion. But from a performance standpoint, the game has frequent dips, stutters, spikes, and everything in between that you can notice while playing. On top of that, there is various pop-in issues as well, which I'll demonstrate when we go in game. Other than that, the options menu is fairly robust. Now granted, it's not up to AAA++ standard. Things like colorblind mode are not available, there's very limited options to change your reticule for aiming, and all these other extra nice things you might expect from a Battlefield or a Call of Duty title. Nonetheless, especially for an indie title coming in about $20 or your regional equivalent, this is a solid options menu. Other than that, you have full choice of which servers you want to use, as well as language options in which the game will have its text. The audio spoken in the game, I honestly don't know what it is, but it sure as shit is not English, that I can tell you for a fact. Now, in terms of your account settings, you can do a variety of different things, but most of them boil down to, well, here's some stats on how often you've played, how little you've played, how much you've played, and some medals and achievements you may have gotten. It's very straightforward, and there are quite a few things here for you to look at. For example, the Schwalrosen MG is something I have a 7% accuracy with, and I have shot 72 shots, gotten 3 kills, and, well, 5 hits. Not exactly the greatest, and you can see which weapons you've used, including mortars and field cannons and frag grenades and even artillery strikes you may have called in. So it's very nice to see what kind of statistics you have in terms of what you have been doing. Enough about all that, let's go ahead and dive into gameplay and talk about the somewhat subpar visuals and some of the issues with the title, as well as some of the immensely satisfying things this World War I experience brings to the table. So Tannenberg has 3 main game modes, and well, the one that is most important is the one we're showing you right now. The other two are deathmatch and attrition modes, which are basically just kill everything in sight and just pretend that that is everything there is. This game mode actually requires squad-based tactics and overarching team play between squads, teams, and allies on the map to take control points and use those control points to have staging areas and take over the map from the opponent. Now, each match will last somewhere between 20 and 25 minutes on average. If you have really equal teams, it can last a bit longer, in the neighborhood of 30-40 minutes. That generally isn't going to be the case, and I'll explain why in a second. Before I dive into the mechanical aspects of the game and the interaction between gunplay and map control and team-based combat and all that stuff, I want to focus on the visuals for a moment. Visual fidelity, overall fidelity of everything the game has, because there are a couple of things I am not so much annoyed by, but somewhat disappointed by. As a, in essence, direct sequel to Verdun, it is expected the game has a lot of similarities to that title. Probably the same engine, a lot of the same tech behind it, and that is generally okay. But what I didn't expect is that the visual fidelity would be, well, the same. Sure, they did some nicer new effects, and they definitely did do a lot of work on the textures and the modeling and the way things look and feel and sound. So don't get me wrong, it's not that they reused models for guns or models for characters or anything like that. Absolutely not. They did a lot of work to make everything feel authentic East European for that time period, and it looks fantastic. But actual visual fidelity of the terrain around you, the visual fidelity of when something gets hit, when an animation goes on, when an enemy runs over a hill, when he falls in a trench, when there is like a mortar explosion, everything feels a little bit clunky. It goes from the way grass just doesn't react when you're near it, which is something I would have expected in a game in 2017. And yes, it is an indie title, so there are limits to what we can expect, but nonetheless, it is still a bit of a shame. But things we definitely don't take away from an indie title is incessant clipping in between terrain, incessant clipping of objects that are in essence stationary. There isn't weather patterns with wind swaying the trees or anything like that. So terrain clipping when just trees go into other trees and when your character can halfway stick its head into a rock just aren't things I can easily look past, especially as this is supposed to be a realistic style World War I shooter. And then you have a really cool looking gun in terms of how it acts, how the recoil is, how you have to bolt action it, and then when you look at the textures of the model, they just sort of feel like something you could expect in a game from 3, 4, 5 years ago, and not something you'd expect coming out now in early access and, well, soon in full release, because this game isn't going to be in early access very long. Their timeline for launch is early 2018, which is only a couple of months, and the game is, well, complete as it is right now. Their main goals are going to be polish, balance, and adding some new UI changes that aren't really done yet. But other than that, this is the game, so don't expect massive overhauls in animation quality or visual fidelity or even performance so much. And that is a bit concerning, as performance is definitely over the place in terms of visuals. As I said, you can clip into terrain, objects don't really feel like they interact well with one another, especially stationary objects. Things like guns and embankments you can use to shoot enemies, things you can interact with to call in a mortar team or a mortar squad, are not only static and basically never have any interaction with itself or anything else, also always sort of feel like they're not part of the map. There's all the background of the terrain. Like many games have this problem that are of a smaller budget. They try to reach for the top in terms of visual fidelity, but then just don't hit the mark quite there, and that really feels notable. That said, it's not a bad looking game in any way, but neither is it a nice looking game, and especially not a high fidelity game, with jagged edges coming around, with blurry textures apparent in every corner everywhere. And for a game that is all about slow-paced methodical control of a map that isn't really fast-paced, everything is bolt action, you're just shooting a weapon and then bolt actioning another bullet and then bolt actioning another bullet and then slowly crawling over a short hill hoping that nobody hits you in the head from somewhere you can't see them. When you're slowly crawling over a little hill, even in a snowy landscape like this map, and the tree trunks look as blurry as you'd expect them to be in something from maybe 4 or 6 years ago on a console, that isn't that great. And it really does break immersion quite a bit when you have a character that looks like an authentic Prussian warrior from World War I in the Eastern Front, and he has a gun and a bayonet and everything in between that you might expect from that time era. And if you grab a photo or a picture from that time period and you put them side by side to these costumes, they look authentic and identical identical to those. And yet the moment he starts moving, you lose any semblance of immersion because his animation looks like, well, outdated. Definitely falls short of great. Something that is definitely great is the way weapons sound and the way they act. Now, not in the animation department. As I said, impact animations when you hit someone are really not that great, and responsiveness of when you hit someone or when someone hits you back is also not that fantastic. Now, part of this can be attributed to lag on the server, maybe some syncing between server and client where they just couldn't really get everything sorted yet. This is early access, this isn't a full launch game, but with only a couple of players online, most of the players in this match are bots. That is still disconcerting when you already have desyncing and lag issues in a title like this before it even hits massive audiences. So I would take note of that and be careful going forward. But sound-wise, when you shoot a gun, you could basically hear a real-life gun going off. It feels phenomenal. The guns feel heavy, feel vibrant. Or, in the case of a small little pistol an officer might carry, they feel flimsy and weak, like a little Pop-Tart coming out. Whereas a heavy mortar gun, you can hear that whistle coming in on the ground, and you know when you hear that whistle, you're dead. If you're not lucky and just be on the right spot at the right time not to get destroyed, if you hear that whistle of an incoming mortar, you are going to be, well, blown up sky high every direction. And that sound alone is so terrifyingly accurate that it just fits immensely well. You actually panic if you're rushing in as a soldier just to try to get a control point captured and you hear that whistle of a mortar. It just makes you sort of panic as a player. And that is excellent sound design in every regard. From a music and audio standpoint, it's not really that impressive. Sure, the overall sounds are great, as I said, but from a music standpoint, there really isn't a lot. And that which is there is mostly in the background. It doesn't obstruct, but neither does it enhance the experience. And you don't really even care, because what you're hearing is the screams of your enemies on the battlefield. Now, about those screams, as I mentioned earlier in the options menu, those screams get incessant, annoying, and loud really fast. Now, that is actually really good. When you shoot an enemy, sometimes they'll just lie back and be dead, especially if you hit them with a headshot. But if an enemy gets hit by a mortar, you can hear him screeching out in agony over the entire battlefield, like you, well, would hear an enemy screeching out across the battlefield when you blow off half their limbs. It is fantastic, fits immensely well, and is just the right amount of times that you hear those yells and screams for their mommies, or your own if you're dying that way, across the battlefield, and well, you can't really do anything about it. They're dead and dying, so you just keep on fighting in between their guts and gore. Phenomenal. On to the gameplay and gunplay of the match itself. The game mode here touts 64 players in a competitive multiplayer split up in squads of 4. And while this is the theory, right now the game isn't out to the mass number of players they need to sustain this kind of matchmaking and squad-based gameplay. Now, the interesting part is that when you make a match and you go into a game mode of 64 people, you can make a squad before you join. So invite 3 of your friends, make a 4-man squad, and go in that way and customize the squad. What kind of loadouts you'll have, what kind of sidearms, grenades, etc. you'll carry with you as a squad. And while in the game, you will be able to help out and you see your squad on the map and interact with them by both chat, voice commands, as well as overall voice in the game to actual talking. So there is 3 ways of communicating. The amount of communication tools this game offers, especially for an indie title, is fairly astronomical and really well put together. Now, if you get thrown in, do get thrown into a squad all the time. It's not like you can just queue up on your own and be solo on the battlefield. If you queue up on your own, which is definitely possible, you get assigned to a random squad. And it's fairly important to cooperate with your allies, and you will be in the same match. So this is where my concern for this game mode comes from. Because both sides are going to have a set amount of players in a set amount of squads, it is fairly important those squads coordinate with one another. And if one side has pre-made squads everywhere and the other side has a lot of one-man solo queue people in hastily thrown together squads that don't have teamwork, it is going to be a steamroll of a match. And that is definitely what already happens when one side gets the upper hand. The addition of more mortar strikes, more air recon, more abilities to call in support troops from the various taken control zones do create a snowball effect that really does stagger forward. On top of that, there is no safe spot to spawn from. There is no safe location where you can stage a re-offense, where you can burst out and sort of try to reclaim land, like many other FPS games in this title do. They all offer a way for players to sort of regroup and get their bearings before rushing in again to fight and kill. In this case, the battlefield is the battlefield, and if your opponent lands 4 squads around your last remaining stronghold, you are not going to break out of that remaining stronghold for the duration of the match, which is definitely a balanced concern, and I do hope they address that quite fast in early access, because the matchmaking mismatch between solo players and pre-made squads, coupled with there not being a safe place or a fallback zone where players can regroup, however realistic it might be, does destroy some of the enjoyment you might have in a match. And if you leave a match halfway through, you lose out on a lot of points and scores, which obviously isn't great. And especially if that match is a steamroll, you're still looking at 10 to 15 minutes of you staring at a screen while you get repeatedly killed. Not exactly fantastic. But when that doesn't happen, the game really becomes a tug of war between two sides, where one side is trying to control certain areas, and because you can't just go deep and take over their main hub, you have to gradually go from area to area, get those lines sorted. When you die and you are in a cut off area, you can't respawn there. You need to be adjacent to another area that is also yours from your headquarters out, so you can spawn in that area. And when something is contested, enemies obviously can't spawn in. So it's really interesting to see how that's going to play out when the game launches in early access, in between the tug of war of taking control of an area with a mortar cannon, with a artillery support you can call in and bombard an area. Overall, the amount of tactics that are available to players in this match mode is pretty significant. So it is even more so an annoyance and a disappointment that the visuals and the feeling of those visuals really doesn't match up. You feel like you are a little tin soldier rushed out for war and you're walking around really stiffly, whereas the game really tries to create an authentic feel. So that mismatch in visuals is what draws it back, not the mechanical strength of the title in any way. So combining that pure multiplayer match mode with 64 players in matches and filled up with bots when there aren't enough players, you do have a very cool open warfare grand scale FPS title. So what is bad then about the combat itself? Because it cannot be perfect, especially not in a smaller indie scale title. And one of the drawbacks I have to say is definitely the feedback you get from the impact on opponents. You'll have your gun and you'll shoot your opponent in the head, and the game will tell you +5 points for a headshot. And you know he is hit in the head, but even in gore settings on maximum, often you don't know, did I hit an enemy? Did I not hit an enemy? He doesn't stagger and crawl on the ground because he's hit. It sort of looks like he's just crouching there. It doesn't matter if you hit an enemy and he's lying back, prone, or you've shot him in the head and he's not moving. You can't really see what your enemy looks like half the time, and part of that is obviously intentional. There is a lot of foliage, there is a lot of grass, there is a lot of hills and craters and everything in between for enemies and yourself obviously to hide behind and hide in for your enemy not be able to see you. But then when you get hit, the directional indicator that you're getting hit is often not really that great. Especially if you're getting hit from the front, somewhere in your general forward-facing vicinity, it just sort of lights up red. You don't really get a good indication of what happens where. That is not great, especially when the guns feel so fantastic and you hit an enemy with a gun and it feels like its head should explode and all he does is keel over in a static, stylized animation, which is a bit of a shame. Now within a match, your squad that you belong to can level up and unlock new squad points and new squad abilities. And you can use these to get better stamina, better run speed, etc, etc. This is fairly important for your squad, especially in the pre-made squad, because this means you can cover more ground, you can sprint more, you can reload faster, etc, etc. It generally just means you are a better squad in performance. And you get these by killing enemies, obviously, by taking objectives. Everything here helps you get points. So everything together creates this authentic, combined arms feeling of a World War I title in the Eastern Front. Overall, a cool FPS experience. I really enjoyed it myself. I enjoyed it much more than I did Battlefield 1 and its World War I variant. There is absolutely no denying that the much higher budget Battlefield 1 definitely looked and felt a lot better in visual fidelity, as well as overall gun feel, animation quality, and overall effect. But from a gunplay perspective, from the authentic gunplay perspective, having bolt action rifles and chemical weapons and everything in between, Tannenberg has a massive lead over that game. It's a great title coming into early access with a few drawbacks. Now in conclusion, the visuals are a little bit of an outdated matter. I do hope they spend some time on it, but judging by the way they have announced their early access timeline, that isn't going to happen. So if you, like me, feel that the visuals are blurry, the animations are subpar, and really detract from the gameplay, that might be a concern. From a gunplay and tactical gameplay of the main game mode, there were absolutely no complaints outside of some concerns in regards to amount of players and gameplay balance within a match, which I hope early access will help them resolve. As I said, it is a direct sequel to Verdun, and in many ways it emulates Verdun in terms of squad gameplay, in terms of authentic feel, but now on the Eastern Front and now scaled up to 64-player multiplayer. From a audio and feedback perspective, the music is nothing to write home about. The weapons, guns, and sounds feel authentic, feel fantastic. As I said, if a mortar shell is whistling in on you, you actually feel terrified as a player as that comes in down, knowing your death is literally flying at your face. Performance-wise, there are a couple of concerns with some server-side performance. Client-side performance, generally really good, and the options menu also accompanies that performance level. Nothing really too much to complain about outside of the outdated looking textures, popping, and clipping between various objects as well, where I hope they definitely spend some time on in early access. So altogether, Tannenberg is an excellent, authentic feeling World War I experience on the Eastern Front, in many ways similar to Verdun, but in many ways an extension and an expansion on that predecessor. And it feels fantastic to shoot enemies in the head and watch their brains spill out while they cry for their mommies in some otherworldly echoing cry. Tannenberg is coming over on Steam on November 16th for the price of $20 US or your regional equivalent. And if you are a Verdun owner, there is a 20% discount if you pre-order the title. So do check that out if you are interested in this title. And if you are interested in this title, you can check it out with the link down below. So thank you for watching. If you like this video, press that like button down below. And if you didn't like this video, well, there's a dislike button for exactly that purpose. And if you want to see more content like this on the channel, just press that subscribe button down below and we will deliver. And if you want to support GuyLogicGaming going forward, there's a link to our Patreon page down in the description below. So I wish you a good day, and until next time, right here on GuyLogicGaming.